They said Iwo Jima would take 5 days, but by the end of the first afternoon, thousands were already wounded, and the island hadn't even started fighting yet. Because the deadliest place on Iwo Jima wasn't the beach, it was everything you couldn't see beneath your feet. At 9 o'clock on February 19, 1945, the first American boot sank into the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, and the island stayed quiet. No rifle fire, no machine guns, no movement. Marines advanced inland, pinned between the surf at their backs, and an enemy that, for the moment, refused to exist. Navy gunfire and aerial bombardment had pulverized everything visible, but what they could not touch was the fight that mattered, because Iwo Jima was not defended on the surface. From February 19th to March 26, 1945, the battle exposed a new truth about modern war. Overwhelming firepower could shatter landscapes without defeating systems. Beneath the ash were rooms, doors, and air. Progress on the surface meant nothing unless the island below stopped breathing. The ground looked dead, but it was very much alive. Before the first ramp dropped, the timetable was already unforgiving. Iwo Jima sat roughly halfway between the Marianas and the Japanese home islands. On paper, it was small, 8 square miles of volcanic rock. But strategically, it mattered far beyond its size. For Japan, the island was an early warning station. Radar on Iwo Jima gave defenders precious minutes to prepare for incoming B-29 raids. For the United States, the same island promised something different. Airfields where damaged bombers could land instead of ditching into the Pacific. Each runway meant crews saved, aircraft recovered, and pressure sustained on Japan's war industry. Admiral Chester Nimitz wanted Iwo Jima taken quickly. Marine planners estimated 5 days to secure the island, then rapid conversion of its airfields into emergency landing strips. Speed was the assumption, attrition was not. On the island, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi read the same map and rejected the war Japan had been fighting until then. There would be no massed beach defenses, no early banzai charges, no dramatic last stands designed for propaganda rather than effect. Instead, Kuribayashi designed Iwo Jima as a system. Guns were buried behind steel doors. Fighting positions were cut into volcanic rock and connected by miles of tunnels. Ventilation shafts allowed air to move where men could not be seen. Each surface position was only an entrance, one mouth connected to a body that could shift, withdraw, and reappear elsewhere. Most importantly, Kuribayashi ordered fire discipline. Beach defenses would stay silent until the landing zones were crowded. The goal was not to stop the invasion. It was to make every yard expensive and paid for in blood. From offshore, the pre-invasion bombardment looked devastating. Battleships and cruisers pounded ridges, and bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives. But Iwo Jima's geology absorbed shock instead of collapsing. Volcanic cinder cratered. It did not cave in. Concrete-lined interiors survived. The island looked destroyed, but it was not. When the first waves hit red and green beaches on February 19th, boots sank into ash that trapped movement and stalled vehicles. Japanese guns stayed silent through the landing. Then, when beaches filled with men and machines, the island spoke. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery erupted from unseen angles. Marines stacked behind shallow dunes that barely stopped shrapnel. Wounded men were dragged into shell holes that filled with water and ash. Tanks bogged, radios crackled with casualty reports that climbed into the thousands by nightfall. Mount Suribachi dominated the southern end of the island. From its slopes, Japanese observers directed fire onto the beaches, and taking it became urgent, not symbolic, but practical. If Suribachi could be blinded, the landing zones might breathe. But north of the mountain, a more dangerous pattern emerged. Positions reported as cleared at noon opened fire again by mid-afternoon. Craters that felt safe became kill zones. Defenders were not reappearing by magic. They were moving through tunnels the surface map could not show. The battle's first theme became clear. Gains meant nothing unless the routes beneath them were denied. The timetable had collided with the island's design. Navy fire had fought the surface, but the defenders were fighting from inside. To win, the Marines would have to reach into enclosed spaces, read airflow, and collapse routes that could not be seen. Flamethrowers would strip oxygen, demolitions would seal exits, tanks would project heat from standoff distances. The 5-day clock was already broken. By February 20th, the surface of Iwo Jima could be sketched quickly. Beaches, terraces, Suribachi in the south, airfields and broken ridges in the north. Beneath it, however, a second map emerged, one defined not by contour lines, but by airflow, concrete thickness, and memory. Japanese engineers had carved miles of tunnels through the porous volcanic lava. Rooms were reinforced with concrete, some protected by steel sliding doors designed to interrupt blasts and flames. Ventilation shafts, many no wider than a fist, rose toward the surface, concealed under rubble or the lip of a crater. A pillbox was not a position in isolation. It was a mouth connected to a body that could withdraw, shift, and then return. That network allowed the Japanese defenders to vanish and reappear. A position would go quiet, Marines would advance, and then fire would erupt from behind them. Reports came in of machine guns that seemed to resurrect themselves. They were not being rebuilt. They were being reoccupied. Airflow became intelligence. Marines learned to feel for drafts with their bare hands, pressing their palms against seams and rock. A cool inward pull meant a chamber somewhere below was still alive. Engineers marked vents with chalk and arrows, numbering them like organs. A sealed entrance meant nothing if the system could still breathe. Kuribayashi's discipline magnified the effect. Fire was registered on likely movement routes rather than static grids. Tanks raised dust. Mortars adjusted on the dust plume. At night, small patrols slipped through interior passages to reset ambushes or recover wounded before retreating back behind steel doors. Front and rear lines flipped without warning. The island absorbed punishment and redistributed it, so methods changed. As the 5-day plan collapsed and the Marines learned how the island actually fought back, the character of the battle changed. It was no longer about momentum or breakthroughs. It instead became a process of reduction, repeated, deliberate, and unforgiving until silence held. By February 25th, the battle settled into a brutal rhythm. Suppress, jet, place, withdraw, listen. This was no longer momentum warfare. It was reduction repeated until silence held. This methodical process became known as Blowtorch and Corkscrew. The M2 flamethrower was not cinematic in practice. Its power lay in physics. When fuel ignited inside a confined space, it consumed oxygen and spiked pressure. The Japanese defenders might never be touched by flame, but heat and overpressure forced them back behind steel doors or deeper into the tunnel network. Flamethrower operators learned restraint. Short bursts, pauses, then another jet to test for draw. A steady roar meant the chamber still fed air. Blowback meant oxygen was gone or a door had sealed the space. Engineers followed with the corkscrew. Satchel charges from 20 to 40 pounds. Pole charges to reach over lips. Bangalores for narrow mouths. Fuse length became a calculation measured in seconds. Too long, and the defenders reopened routes. Too short, and the blast belonged to the man who placed it. Charges went where roofs were thinnest, or airflow suggested a junction beyond the visible mouth. Zippo tanks extended the blowtorch method outward. Sherman flamethrower tanks projected thickened fuel 60 to 80 yards, letting crews arc fire into openings that infantry could not approach. That reach mattered. It allowed tanks to trace seams in rock, revealing hidden exits by following the smoke. Fuel was rationed in 1 to 3 second bursts. A Zippo carried minutes of flame, not hours. Armored bulldozers worked in tandem with the tanks, carving approach lanes and piling spoil over exits. A main mouth would be hosed. Smoke would leak from a seam 30 yards away, and that seam would then become the priority. Flamethrowers would jet again, engineers would follow, and only when airflow stopped did anyone then move forward. Reduction meant silence that lasted, and human moments punctuated the method. On February 23rd, near Airfield Number 1, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams repeatedly crossed open ground with a flamethrower, using shell holes to cool tanks and steal seconds of breath. Riflemen timed covering fire to his movement. Engineers followed close enough to place charges where flame could not reach. Interlocking pillboxes fell through coordination, not spectacle. Casualties remained heavy. Burns, shrapnel, and concussion were constant. Ash inhalation turned coughing into routine, but patterns shifted. Rear ambushes declined, where vents were identified and sealed. Positions that once reopened at dusk stayed quiet at dawn. Night listening posts lay beside sealed mouths, fingers resting on trip flares, listening for movement within. Not every strike worked. On Nishi Ridge, a team jetted a mouth and placed a satchel, only to be hit from a low slit they had missed. The lesson was logged and relearned. Airflow first, entrances second. The island punished the shortcuts. By late February, Blowtorch and Corkscrew was no longer an adaptation. It was doctrine. The island's breathing slowed, not because it was beaten, but because it was being closed, chamber by chamber. On February 23, 1945, a patrol climbed Mount Suribachi and raised a small flag, then a larger one. Offshore, ships sounded their horns. Cameras captured an image that would travel the world, compressing Iwo Jima into a single frozen moment of triumph. In the south, the observation post was gone. Morale lifted, the beaches felt lighter. But in the north, the battle was only tightening. From February 24th through the first weeks of March, the fight's center of gravity remained around the airfields and broken ridges, terrain tied into the deepest and most resilient sections of the underground system. Here, the landscape fractured into a chain of named problems. Nishi Ridge, the amphitheater, Turkey Knob, and Hill 382. These were not isolated hills captured in single assaults. They were interconnected defensive zones that had to be reduced over time, often repeatedly, as their underground connections were identified and sealed. Nishi Ridge guarded the western approaches toward the airfields and became one of the earliest northern strongpoints to be contested after Suribachi fell. Fighting here was heaviest in the last days of February. The ridge appeared neutralized more than once, only for fire to resume as defenders shifted through tunnels and reopened positions after dark. Resistance in this sector began to fade only when its galleries and ventilation routes were collapsed, cutting the ridge off from the wider system. The amphitheater was not a hill at all, but a natural bowl of shattered ground ringed by elevated firing positions. It became a focal point in late February and early March as Marine units entered the basin and were struck from multiple directions all at once. Control was not achieved by clearing the floor of the amphitheater, but instead by sealing the surrounding tunnel network. Once those routes were denied, the bowl lost its ability to function as a kill zone, and resistance there ceased. Turkey Knob looked minor on maps, but it resisted stubbornly into the end of February. Its strength came from density rather than height, a compact cluster of reinforced positions whose tunnels fed into adjacent ridges. Fighting here was intense but localized, and the position finally went quiet only when engineers and flamethrower tanks sealed multiple exits simultaneously, preventing the defenders from withdrawing, waiting, and returning. Hill 382 anchored the northern defense and held out the longest. Combat around the hill continued into mid-March, overlapping with the final phase of the campaign. By then, Japanese forces were no longer operating as a coordinated defense, but as isolated cells instead. Hill 382 did not fall in a decisive assault. It fell silent as its galleries were collapsed, its ammunition detonated in sealed chambers, and its remaining defenders were cut off from one another. Taken together, these positions did not mark a single day of victory. They marked a process. From late February into mid-March, resistance in the north ended not with a breakthrough, but with suffocation. One ridge after another lost the ability to breathe, move, and communicate. When that happened, the fighting did not end everywhere at once, but it could no longer continue as a system. The image of the Mount Suribachi flag raised on February 23rd traveled faster than this reality. Stateside newspapers spoke of turning points. However, on Iwo Jima, commanders stopped briefing breakthroughs and started briefing reductions achieved. Galleries collapsed, vents sealed, routes denied. Progress was not measured in yards. It was measured by how long a position stayed silent. Suribachi mattered. It anchored the South and blinded observers. But the price of Iwo Jima was paid in the North, where the island's interior still had lungs. Only when those lungs were closed, one chamber at a time, did lines finally begin to move for good. From February 19th to March 26th, 1945, Iwo Jima was not taken by speed, it was taken by method. The battle exposed three truths that only became clear once the 5-day promise had collapsed. First, positions could be reoccupied endlessly through tunnels, vents, and sliding doors, unless the routes beneath them were denied. What looked destroyed on the surface could remain lethal underground. Second, visible progress meant nothing unless interior spaces lost the ability to breathe. Ground gained without airflow denied was ground that could be taken back after dark. And third, the blowtorch and corkscrew method, rifles to pin, flame to strip oxygen and spike pressure, demolitions to collapse roofs and seal exits, turned movement into control by making positions stay silent. It was not elegant, it was repeatable, and by mid-March, the defender system failed. Radio traffic thinned to fragments, ammunition cooked off in sealed rooms, organized resistance collapsed, not in spectacle, but in isolation, as cells went quiet where they stood. Kuribayashi's strategy of dispersion and delay had extracted maximum cost. But once the network could no longer breathe, it could no longer fight. Kuribayashi did not survive Iwo Jima. He was never captured, and his body was never identified. By mid-March, as the underground system he built collapsed chamber by chamber, he vanished from the record, killed somewhere on the island he had designed to fight without surrender. On March 16th, organized resistance in the central sector faded. Final counterattacks broke against coordinated rifle, flame, and demolition teams, repeating a now standard cycle. By March 26th, mop-up operations ended the campaign. The island had not surrendered. It had been closed, and the cost matched the method. Roughly 21,000 Japanese defenders were killed. Only a few hundred were captured. U.S. Marine and Navy casualties exceeded 26,000, with nearly 7,000 killed. It remains the only battle in Marine Corps history in which American casualties outnumbered those of the enemy. Victory came, but only when the lungs of the island could no longer breathe, and the system beneath it collapsed. If you want more stories from history's most defining moments, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications.